my name is Mike McNeil. I am the CEO of Fleet Device Management. You also may know me as the creator and benevolent dictator for life of Sales.js, popular Node framework for Node.js, and it's also open source. So great to be back at Postman Galaxy. Wish we could all be together in person, but this is pretty cool. And I'm excited this is my first remote conference. So here we go. So I've been wondering a lot recently about security. There's a lot of things going on in the world right now that make you kind of wonder who's tapping into the wire. And beyond just that, at work, right? We use our work laptops. We log on to work servers. We install stuff on our smartphones, but we don't really know what's being monitored. And we all endeavor to have nothing to hide, I think, or most of us, right? We want to live our lives in such a way where we can be transparent and there's no secrets that we need to keep from the people on our teams and our families. But at the same time, when you start to take a closer look at your servers, for example, if you ever went to university or a similar kind of establishment and you, let's say at the University of Texas, if you ran a sudo command on the servers there, they would send you an email sometimes if you ran a command you shouldn't, and they would say, hey, thanks for trying this out. Thanks for playing around. And maybe don't do that ever again. So ever since that moment in my life, I knew someone was watching servers. I think a lot of folks out there have had similar situations, either at work or at school. But it gets a little closer at home when it's your actual laptop. So a lot of us that work for more established companies will often have a work laptop that we actually get issued by the company. And that laptop, it's pretty well known that you don't do personal things on that, right? But there's still kind of a border. I was doing a contract back in 2019 for Walmart Labs, and I remember I traveled to Portland. And I was in my hotel room, and I only brought my work laptop because you're not going to bring two laptops on the plane, or I didn't want to. And I remember calling my wife, and we kind of queued up our screens, and we hit play at the same time, and we watched Inuyasha, the anime series reruns, together, just to spend some time together while I was away. And it occurred to me later on, right? Who at Walmart is like getting a little alert saying, hey, that guy Mike, he's watching Inuyasha on Crunchyroll or whatever. He's doing a call, right, at the same time. And if it's a personal laptop, it goes even further, right? So if it's your own, let's say you're spending some time at home working on your own personal projects, doing your own open source contributions, is your employer aware of that if you're bringing your own device? And on your smartphone, like if you have to get provisioned on your smartphone underneath some kind of mobile device management policy to access your email, your calendar, your Slack channels, does that mean that your employer can see everything you're doing on your phone? And how much, if not everything? So it turns out, after digging into this a little bit, that for the most part, companies tend to be pretty well behaved. And most of the people in corporate IT don't really want to know all of your personal details either. But it's unclear and it varies widely from company to company, from organization to organization. So universally, it seems like companies, they want to know, right, if there's any vulnerable packages that might be installed on your computer, like maybe a bad version of OpenSSL that puts you at risk. Same thing on servers, right? They also want to see if you're exfiltrating data. So let's say that you couldn't figure out how to get your phone onto the VPN, and so you send yourself a Google Doc or you send yourself an email so you can read something while you go downstairs and make a cup of coffee. That's the kind of thing that companies keep a kind of a close eye on. What apps you have installed, what processes are running, whether your screen is locked or not, how many hours you spend online. those are iffier, and companies tend to have kind of dual motivations there. But the question is, can they see it? Like whatever is installed on your computer, is it actually sending this information back? Same thing for the daemon running on your servers or whatever software is running on your phone. And then it gets a little bit weirder. So what about the files on your desktop? What about the pictures of your wedding and your children? What about your browser history when you were looking up whatever weird boils have erupted all over your hands after you touched that weird plant, right? And what about every keystroke you type? It sounds a little crazy, but it's a pretty big deal if that is happening, right? Because that means any password you type, any credit card number you type, any personal message you type in the Messages app on your Mac, all of that would be visible if that were the case. So let's take a closer look at that. So there I am. Oh, look at me. Back in 2001, this is middle school. And then I learned a little bit about keyloggers during that time. Now, keyloggers presumably have changed, and I haven't fiddled with keyloggers for about 20 years now. But keyloggers, the way they work, at least back in 2020 or in 2001, is you would run in this time an exe file on a Windows machine, and it would pop up this little app. You generate an agent. You would trick someone into installing the agent on their device, and then every 30 minutes you get an email with everything they typed. Everything they've typed. And that goes on until they figure it out. And it turns out it's really easy to get someone to run one of these files. All kinds of tricks that one might use, right? You can imagine someone using creating skins for a video game, or someone creating a bad link in an email, someone creating a bad version of an app, and somehow getting that out there and getting you to download that version instead of the real version. The other thing about this, if you think back to here, is when you're generating these agents in the first place, you're actually running a binary, right? So just the very act of getting involved with any of this kind of software, you start to wonder, did that put me at risk too, right? So the weird thing is that keyloggers are actually really similar in structure and in the way that they're deployed to how most corporate IT departments are monitoring company laptops, servers, and to a lesser degree, smartphones. Not much has changed, right? It's 20 years later. There are still keyloggers out there. We've gotten a little bit better about finding them. But we actually, if probably more than ever before, have this kind of monitoring on our own computers. So if you are, let's say that you're a small company and you do want to get your devices monitored, maybe you need to meet some kind of compliance goal, right? So you'll run your software to generate agents. So if you were doing a keylogger, this is where you run the exe file to create the agent in the first place. That creates a second exe file. You install the agents on all of your servers and employee devices. So maybe you have like Chef or Ansible set up to get it out to the servers, or some other build pipeline. And then maybe you're working with something like Rippling or another service to get this actually installed on the laptops of your employees. Now, corporate IT is not getting an email with everything you've typed, thankfully, every 30 minutes. In fact, it's pretty rare for corporate IT to be monitoring every keystroke. And we're not going to get here into whether or not that's a good thing. I think it's a little creepy, right? But the fact of the matter is, whatever this agent is that's installed on your laptop, on your phone, on your servers, it's doing something, and nobody that's actually using those devices is aware of what it can access. And there's not really any way that you can check because these things are proprietary. And so with this black box, you kind of have to stop, especially in the world of corporate IT that we live in now, where everyone is pursuing a zero trust model. Everyone's working from home. You don't want to have weird stuff going on people's devices that you're not familiar with. And yet we have these proprietary agents installed all over our networks that are doing something. And the solution is transparency. So we don't have to have certainty that our employer is not keylogging us, but if they are, we should totally know, right? If our employer can read the files on our desktop and see the pictures of our kids, that's weird, but fine, I guess, as long as we know, as long as everybody is clear about that going on. So how do we get to transparency? We'll start with the agent itself, this agent being the thing like the keylogger. So if we wanted to build an agent from scratch the right way, we would prioritize ubiquity. We want this to be one agent to rule them all across all of the different kinds of devices, Windows, Linux, Mac, all the flavors of server OSs out there, Docker containers, etc. Chrome OS. We would want it to be lightweight, right? We would want to make sure that it's not going to lock up your computer when you turn it on. And if you've worked for a bigger company, you've probably experienced something like this before, where some tool mismatch or who knows, there's no transparency, right? It just freezes up and you're unable to use your computer for a while. Whatever we're going to install, we should make sure that it's lightweight and has very low risk of doing that. And then lastly, we want to make sure that it's open. And the best way to do that is to make it open source. So this fella here, Richard Stallman, famously, he created the GNU project and actually a lot of our favorite tools that you can access on the terminal, stuff like LS and CP, I believe, or in GCC, right? It's the most prominent example, probably because it has GNU in the name. So this guy, he got his start in open source when he wanted to do some hacking of the device drivers for his printers. And he started looking at the software and it was all already compiled and he couldn't access the source code, right? And so he was like, that sucks. I want to be able to fix this. It's broken, it's bad, it's slow. I can't start up my computer, right? So that's why he created GNU. And that is exactly where kind of the situation we're in right now with device management software. Thankfully, this guy here, Zach Wasserman, the CTO of Fleet and my co-founder, a few years back in 2016 when he was at Facebook, created this thing called osquery with actually a bunch of other great people, but probably most notably this guy here on the left, Mike Arpaia, and then that's Zach, little baby Zach on the right. And what osquery is it's an open source agent. It's pretty much exactly what we've been talking about. It's lightweight, it's written in Go, it sits on your device, and it returns information about all kinds of things. Your shell history that you've typed into the terminal, the version that you have installed of important packages, the operating system itself, installed Chrome extensions. And what it sends back is going to vary per platform. But whatever it sends back comes back in a standard format, right? So not every table will work on Mac. Not every table will work on Windows. But all of that information is standardized, documented, and most importantly, it's open source. So it's lightweight in this case because partially that's been a priority, right? So because it started at Facebook and Facebook has a ton of these devices, right, and hosts that it has to monitor, it needed to be thin, it needed to be performance conscious. And then making it open source was a way to hopefully get some contributions from the community and also make it more pleasant to work with and more visible to everyone in case something breaks and needs to get fixed. And so thankfully, that's what Facebook did, was open source it. And then because of these factors, right, it has actually grown a lot in popularity over the last 5 years. It's gone from being a Facebook internal project to being used widely across the Fortune 1000. And a bunch of MSSPs and smaller companies as well. So that's cool, but like, why is it so great, right? Well, there was a key innovation that that Mike Arpaia and team stumbled across, and it. So if you take a look back, I don't know, in the 1970s, right? And people had a billion kinds of databases that had been set up. They all had proprietary languages. Out comes SQL, and SQL provides a standard way of querying those databases to access important data about your company and about your products, and about your people. 50 years later, SQL is still widely adopted. There's great alternatives actually too, of course, but a lot of people know SQL. And much like JavaScript and a lot of the secret sauce of Node.js, right, is there's already this widespread adoption of SQL. And then what Mike Arpaia and Zach and the team did is they took SQLite, which is a little micro SQL database, and they took it apart and they took out the query planner and the SQL parser, and then they hooked those up to basically mock tables, right, that are hooked up to device information. So if you've ever used the sales framework, it's actually a lot like Waterline, the ORM, and the adapter plugin system. So much so that the first time Zach told me about this, I was just like, oh man, that is actually a thing that we should have done and may still eventually do in Waterline. So osquery is pretty sweet, but it's not enough by itself. How do you get the agent installed in the first place? How do you get the data off the agent? It's great that we have this standard way of talking to the agents and the standard way of results coming back, but like, where does it go then? And so it turns out there's kind of three pieces to this, or three priorities once we look past the agent. And we can ask this guy here for more details, because actually this, when you think about keyloggers, there's actually, it's the same problem, right? So if you wanted to get a keylogger installed, you've got to get it in, you've got to get someone enrolled, right? So you've got to get somehow on that device, you need to run this agent, this daemon. You also need to configure it, right? Especially as things change. And in a corporate IT setting, you need to keep it up to date as well, so that it's constantly protected against any new security vulnerabilities that may have been found. And then anytime an employee leaves or an employee joins the company, or a new server gets added or a server gets removed, or there is a new team reshift, right? So maybe a bunch of people move to a different organization within a big giant company. All of this kind of, these small problems that a little, script kiddie might run across trying to install a keylogger, they become like huge, big, complicated problems. And then similarly, like you can't just get an email, right, every 30 minutes with all of the information from these devices. For one thing, it's not enough. You need more. So getting that data integrated into where it needs to go involves sometimes 10, 20 different tools. Some of them are vendor tools, some of them are internal. And then you also need to have certainty that all of those things you're talking to in the pathway of that data from the transparent, trustable device agent all the way to where it actually needs to go in your organization are also transparent, and that you can trust them. And you can't just assume trust, you need certainty. And that means it needs to be open source. And that's what Fleet's about. So we're in our second year. Fleet's an open source project. It takes all of the data from these osquery agents and it consolidates it into a central hub that pumps that data out to wherever you need it to go. And it also offers a live query interface, so you can go in, use a little ACE editor in the browser, type a query, hit send, and get immediate results. So you're not waiting 30 minutes for email, you're getting an answer in something like 10, 30, 60 seconds. And most importantly, Fleet itself, much like other open source apps like GitLab, is an open source server that you can deploy and run yourself. So when I created sales, getting to longevity came at a cost. So I learned a lot trying different things to make sales work as a business over the years. And eventually what I found out is that I needed to pretty much be benevolent dictator for life for the rest of my life, or it was going to not stay afloat unless I took some actions. And so there was some stuff I figured out and I set up, and I've employed folks and figured out ways to get our costs low to where sales will always be around as an indie project, and it will always be my go-to way of building apps that I build for my teams, my companies. And the same is true for a lot of other folks. But sales was not that took a lot of special love. With Fleet, we went about it a little bit differently. We put our thinking caps on, and we looked at what other open source business models have been successful, and then we asked ourselves, what can we do to make Fleet work the same way? So what Fleet is an open core business that is supporting a completely MIT licensed open source product. And then adding features, mostly free and open source features, but also paid enterprise features over time. So that's how it's going to be around, basically. A key part of all of this working, right, is that we can actually pump the data from these devices where it needs to go. So here's just a smattering of examples of different destinations that, and these are actually external destinations companies use. There's also just a myriad of possibilities for how these things can get hooked up. Like right now, people are hiring security engineers like crazy. And there's more than ever before, there's been a drive to like, hey, let's really truly own how our architecture is set up for monitoring and managing devices. So Brendan over at Atlassian is one of our contributors. We actually had a great contribution from someone at Yelp as well, and I didn't get their name ready for this. I should have, but he added S3 support. And so just going back to this chart here, basically we're working towards adding more and more of these all the time. So rather than trying to build the best security tool in the world by creating all of the features that anyone might ever want, what we're trying to do with this project is create an open source central solution that supports any of the other great options out there. So just to run through where we're headed, if you wanted to contribute and help us kind of stop reinventing the wheel and build some shared tools together, we are building role-based access control, auto-updating, vulnerability management, baseline queries, so being able to ask common questions instead of having to write all of these SQL queries yourself, compliance tracking, more performance monitoring in that effort of pursuing a lightweight tool, and a lot of other cool stuff that I probably don't have time to go into right now. So is it any good? I'll give you a quick demo. This is a little local preview of Fleet that I'm running. You can actually go to the repo. We actually ended up creating a new repository, but we've actually gotten up to 159 stars. So thank you everyone who's done that. Down here, if you go to the try Fleet section, you can see you can run npm install. You'll need Docker, and then just run Fleet control preview. And then you'll see something like this. And it's idempotent, so you can do this again. And this isn't your setup for contributors, but this is just to give you an idea. So you'll run that. There's like a setup flow, much like you'd see on something like WordPress.com. And here I am looking at my host. So these are all my devices. These are some fake ones, and this is my local computer here, Fleetwood Mike. So I can click on it. I can see some basic information that Fleet's tracking for me, my serial number, my hardware model. I can start querying. And let's say if I wanted to do just a real simple one, I can select star from apps. And that'll show me all of the apps I have installed. I can do the same with Chrome extensions, running processes. You can see there's my camera driver thing running in the background. 1Password, the password manager. And then if we go over and look at some of these save queries, you can see that, so this is like full SQL, right? So that means you can do some pretty fancy stuff. If you wanted to get the checksums of all the running processes on the system so that you can monitor any changes that might have occurred due to some kind of malicious actor getting onto your machine, you might write a query like this. And I'll just target just my computer. And you can see these are all of the processes running on my machine and their checksums and their remote address they're talking to. Well, I didn't actually select the checksum, but I'll fast forward so we can see some more. You could, like, for example, this one's pretty complicated. So you could trace a process tree. So here I'm going a little crazy with the SQL. We'll do it we'll do it for all hosts. You can actually run these queries on more than one host at the same time. And at a large organization, this is more like you might run it on 50,000 right at a time. And there's some capabilities here to do gradual rollouts. You can do canaries. I won't demo that right now, but feel free to pop into Slack and ask. Just head over to fleetdm.com and join the community there on Slack. So one other thing to point out is that Fleet supports scheduled queries. So you can actually hook up query packs, which is an osquery concept. And you can, for example, monitor running processes and their checksums and have that pump out to one of your log destinations. And Fleet also has a command line tool, Fleet Control, which we used a little bit just now to get to the preview, but just about everything you can do in the UI, and our goal is literally everything you can accomplish with the command line tool for Fleet Control. And here, this is actually Postman. I got my Postman team set up. I have just the simplest host just to give you a taste. And you can see that I can also access everything that I can access in the Fleet UI over an API. And this is documented, and a lot of teams that use Fleet today actually use this API to do their own internal, to build their own internal stuff on top of Fleet. So if you want to contribute, we'd love to have you. So pop over and say hello.
Thanks, Mike. That was awesome. I learned a lot about security right now.
Awesome. Thanks.
So we do have about 2 minutes left before this session ends, and because they'll auto close in the next 2 minutes before the next session. If you want to answer any questions.
Yeah, for sure.
I did see someone ask a question in the Slido. Have you ever discovered something like a keylogger on your computer that you weren't aware of?
In my adult life, no. In my youth, I was pretty much reformatting my computer like twice a year. Yes, definitely yes.
Yeah, you never know what you can find.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, something that I think wasn't immediately obvious until I caught my first one, which is just you want to make sure you don't just run random software that you don't trust. Anything you execute, that can happen to you, basically.
Good advice. Okay. Well, I don't see any other questions. So yeah, this session will end in a minute. So the next security talk is with Stackhawk on why developers struggle with application API security. So thanks again, Mike. That was really great. A lot of good information. And this session is recorded, so if anyone wanted to recap or catch it again, it's available on YouTube shortly after this conference.
Awesome. Thanks, Fu. Thanks, everybody, for watching.